the débat. The honourable member for Scarborough Rouge Park.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'm astonished at the speech by my good friend from Saskatoon Grasswood. What an amazing defense of our Canadian broadcaster. So thank you to my friend. I want to share with you some observations and some experience that I've had with the CBC. I heard about the CBC probably before I even came to Canada. I was probably about 7 or 8. I was living in Dublin, Ireland, and there were 4 channels there. There was 2 Irish channels and BBC 1 and BBC 2. And they used to have pictures of our Expo 67 and the Olympics from Montreal, and they'll have on occasion pictures of the North, small vignettes of Canada, and that was my vision when I came as a 10-year-old to this country. That was my vision of this country. This service defined to me what Canada was: such a vast, beautiful, gorgeous, diverse country with so many different peoples and languages and cultures, and that was really my initial snippets of this country. When I came here, and I think maybe around 11 or 12, I was an avid reader of the news, and I tuned into the National virtually every day, fighting with my mother, saying it's too late, I got to go to bed, but fighting, wanting to see the National, with Knowlton Nash, who would have the world's best journalists around the world giving us the news, the Schlesingers, the names. They would give us a good sense of what the world was. I grew up on that. I grew up on the day when Knowlton Nash came on television and said, Canadian broadcasting is so important to me that we're not going to let Peter Mansbridge go. I'm going to step aside so that we can have another Canadian broadcaster who can take over as CBC national anchor. That is the type of values that this broadcaster has given us. And I grew up watching that over the years. I don't think that there are very few days in my life where I've missed the newscast. So when last November I was trying to look at what's happening in the U.S. election, and I was turning the channels, I went to virtually the million channels that my friend from Saskatoon University was talking about, trying to figure out what was going on. I kept switching, and finally I came back to tune into the CBC, who had exceptional coverage, or the coverage from Brexit, or the coverage when every major event around the world takes place. We end up going back to the CBC. Every time I travel across the world, and I travel quite a bit, there are very few days where I don't try to get an internet version of the National and to look at what's going on, and not just in our country but around the world, because it is something that only CBC can do. So I am quite astonished, I'm in fact shocked, that on Canada's 150th birthday, we have a motion here, bill here effectively trying to destroy the very core of our Canadian identity. It is offensive, and I'm beyond words to describe why on earth we would have a debate in this House in this year on such an important milestone year for us, to have such a frivolous debate on the CBC. I think it's shameful that we're even having this debate, but nevertheless, we're having it, and I want to add my voice to those eloquent voices who have spoken in defense of this national institution. So, Madam Speaker, I want to just take this opportunity to present to my colleagues the reasons why I'm opposing C-308, which would privatize the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation and amend several acts, including the Broadcasting Act. In September, when he presented this bill, the member for Saskatoon University described the CBC Radio Canada as a state broadcaster. According to him, privatizing the corporation would make it a public broadcaster that truly belongs to Canadians. We disagree. CBC Radio Canada is our national public broadcaster, and as such, it already belongs to Canadians. This Crown Corporation was created in 1936 in response to the increasing American influence on Canadian radio. It was then, and remains today, essential to Canadian democracy and our cultural sovereignty. As a national public broadcaster, CBC Radio Canada must fulfill its mandate as described in the 1991 Broadcasting Act. This duty is not to be taken lightly. The Act stipulates that the corporation should provide radio and television services incorporating a wide range of programming that informs, enlightens, and entertains Canadians. De plus, cette programmation
This programming should also be typically Canadian, in French and in English, and to be of equivalent quality, and take into account Canada's uniqueness. It should reflect both communities, including minorities, and reflect the multicultural characteristics of Canada. All of that enabling us to share our national identity and to reflect our culture. This is important for Canadians.
In addition, the legislative framework that currently governs the corporation gives it great autonomy from the government, so far as its daily activities are concerned. It also guarantees that it is independent in terms of journalism, creativity, and programming. What is more, since CBC Radio Canada receives public funding, the legislative framework requires it to be accountable to Parliament and consequently to all Canadians. But C308 would repeal the legislative framework that makes CBC Radio Canada a unique entity in the Canadian broadcasting space. As a private company, CBC Radio Canada would be accountable only to its shareholders. The risk is that it would become unrecognizable to us and that we would no longer recognize ourselves in it. To fulfill its mandate, CBC Radio Canada currently provides numerous services. CBC Radio Canada's television services include 2 national television networks, 27 conventional television stations, and the 5 specialty channels, ICI, RDI, and CBC News World, Documentary, Explora, and ARTV. Meanwhile, CBC Radio Canada's service includes 4 national radio networks, including 50 English language radio stations via Radio 1 and Radio 2, more than 30 French language radio stations via ICIP Premiere and ICI Musique, and a radio service in Northern Canada. I would like to see the private broadcasters be able to emulate this even 10% of the way. Moreover, CBC Radio Canada offers programming in 8 Indigenous languages through CBC North, broadcasts an advertisement-free online international radio service in 5 languages, and participates in the TV5 Monde International Consortium. It should also be mentioned that CBC Radio Canada provides numerous digital services to keep pace with the evolution of broadcasting in Canada and of Canadians' content consumption habits, and to ensure that its programming is offered everywhere in this country. In addition, ICIRadioCanada.ca, CBC.ca, and ICIMmusique.ca, CBC Radio Canada operates Curio.ca, a site that allows teachers and students to stream Radio Canada's and CBC's educational content. It also produced a documentary in virtual reality to investigate the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women. In doing so, CBC Radio Canada plays an essential role in presenting Canadian content in the digital universe of today, and I argue tomorrow. This bill is very problematic. We as Canadians need to celebrate our identity. There are very few ways that we do that. We're not like other countries where we have our identity on our sleeve. It's a country, relatively young country at 150, that is trying to grapple with its past. It's trying to explain the current realities for many Canadians. But one of the very few outlets that we have to do that is the CBC. And I want to just ask my friends, my colleagues here, to support the CBC unconditionally. Yes, it's not a perfect organization. Yes, it does need improvement, but it is ours, and it is a true reflection of our identity, an identity that is still being developed, an identity in which we can all take pride. But in our 150th anniversary, let's reaffirm our support for the CBC and our national institutions. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Resuming debate.